Hi, welcome to another episode of The Consulting Trap. I'm your host, Brian Maddox. I am joined today by Jay Gordman. Welcome, Jay.
Hey, good morning, Brian. How are you?
Well, thank you so much. Jay, you're with yorCMO.com, and I'd love to hear more about kind of how you got started with that and what you're doing in that space.
Sure. So yorCMO, we are a team of fractional chief marketing officers. We go into companies and help them really craft marketing plans, the strategy, and the go-to-market execution in terms of helping them grow. And so a lot of companies jump to just the advertising approach, and we take a step back and really look at their offering, their price strategy, their buyers, the sales alignment, and just a bigger picture look, and then really help them execute it. So just we're a member of their team and help them grow.
So in your sort of travels, are there recurring themes that your clients aren't getting right? Stuff that, or the initial clients, the folks that are about to buy your services, they're consistently making the same mistakes over and over. What are the recurring themes there?
The number one recurring theme is they don't understand their buyer as much as they think they do. They say they know, but they really don't. And when we dig in and start doing research and talking to buyers, we understand their triggers much better. What triggers the need for their service or product? How do they go about finding information? How do they compare product? How do they compare like options? And so it really helps shift not only potentially product or price strategy, but also positioning. And in many cases, companies are just not speaking to their target audience the way the audience is expecting to be talked to.
So you say that your buyers don't know their audience or their prospects as well as they think they do. What? Mm-hmm. So how would what would be like a trigger or an indicator that like you don't know your client as well as you think you do? What were the kind of things that they would say versus what you would say maybe about their prospect? What insight would you have that's different?
Yeah, so one of the first indications is that they've never talked to them outside of just the casual conversation as clients. Two, that they're not seeing the performance, whether it's through the sales channels or even the marketing, advertising, paid or owned or earned media channels, and they're not seeing that type of performance. And so we go back to the beginning. And when we ask clients, what triggers the need for your client? They can't talk about it deep enough. And that is another red flag. They also don't think about clients segmented enough. And so there's many people involved, especially in the B2B world, into the buying decision. And so they just don't think about those folks. And then they don't think about the where they are in the funnel and how the messaging changes throughout the funnel. And so they just don't have that really truly mapped out. And those are the red flags that we look for and then take a step back and say, it's time to map this out and put it in, because there's no way a sales and marketing organization can be optimized without it.
So when that works well, obviously you can sit at the end of the assembly line and go, oh yes, I'm getting more finished product out here.
Right.
But, when it works well, what does it feel like for the folks involved? Like, what is the difference, right? I imagine at some level it's grinding gears or trying harder as opposed to working smarter at some level. But if you have a little bit of interest, a little bit of insight there, that'd be helpful.
Well, if you're asking after we put these things in place and begin to optimize, there's a sense of relief, quite frankly, because they have been grinding so hard. And then there's this sense of excitement because now things begin to work. And many of the tactics are not the wrong tactics. They're just not landing properly on the target audience. And so there's just this feeling of, relief, of excitement. The sales team tends to get excited because they're not grinding as hard. And it's more of a playbook, and it's more like, an NBA fast break. When it goes well, it's just this art. And when it doesn't go well and everybody trips over each other and you miss the layup, that's the difference. And people are very excited about the outcome.
So I imagine that the process that you go through to be that fractional CMO, you're going to run into resistance all the time, right? Not just from the process that you're going to take folks through, but organizationally, a lot of companies will define themselves a certain way, and letting go of that identity has got to be part of how you move that conversation forward. How do you work with those sort of unruly founders who have like, no, this is the way it's always been?
Yeah, we try not to actually. One of our core values is value the expertise, trust the process, and value the expertise. And as we look at talking to clients, and they really don't seem to be bought in, there in some cases we won't work with those folks. But when you take a step back and you have the right growth minded CEO or founder, the reality is they just want to win. And so we don't get a lot of resistance typically, from those types of things. We worked with a client. They had their business for 10 years. And when we came in and said, your customers don't think about you the same way you think about yourself and the way you communicate. And after we showed them the data, we talked to 800 of their customers. And after, the stunned silence, they realized, okay, we have a great business and we have what the customer wants and we're growing. But if you want to really put the gas on it, we need to talk the way they talk. And once we made the switch, they open new locations. They're a brick and mortar business, and their locations break even went from well over a year to a few months. And so, any owner that wouldn't get excited about that and willing to give up a little bit of history for that kind of future, those are the types of people you want to work with.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that. People want, have to be willing to give up some of their history to buy the future that they're looking for.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting sentiment. I like it.
Yeah.
So during these exchanges, and as you kind of work through this growth conversation, what are are there stages? Are there indicators that somebody's maybe at a level 1 versus a level 2? Like, what are the kind of major moving pieces that have to be in place to get to that hockey stick level kind of growth?
Yeah, well, we start with a marketing audit, and so regardless of those customers, that's where we start. And once you start doing internal interviews, you tend to find, in many cases, a lack of alignment, whether that's between sales and marketing, the leadership, and the sales and marketing team, and you find that a lot. Then the buyer issues, and then you tend to find that the people who are managing the tactics and managing the activity, in many cases, don't have the expertise to manage it efficiently, and to make sure that it's being optimized. And so, it's not really level 1, 2, 3, but those are kind of some of the key benchmarks that occur, in an audit phase. And then once they go through the foundational planning and you begin to put the building blocks in place, regardless of whether it's a good company like the example I talked about before, or a company that's really struggling, everybody at that point becomes very much aligned on where we're going, how we're going to get there, who are the buyers, what do they want, how do we offer what they want, and regardless, everybody's at that point fully aligned. Regardless of where they started, at that point, everybody is a much higher level than they used to be.
All right. So switching gears, I have a question that I know it's a loaded question, so it's okay if you're like, no, there's nothing. But is there any tactic that you've worked across your client base that has worked for nearly everyone?
Wow. Everybody is so different. I would say you can never go wrong being found at Google. We have a client whose customers get their information. They're in small markets, and so they get their information from small market peers and state agencies and state trade organizations. And their first thing is not to go to Google. But the reality is, once they hear about this client or this, recommended, and they go search, you need to be found, and you need to have a really good digital landscape that people trust and build your brand. So I would say you'd never go wrong with having a very, good presence at Google, both, high up in search, that your brand's represented well, that you have good reviews and those types of things. I don't think there's any client ever that would have that would be wrong for.
So that's interesting. I guess the having that sort of online digital storefront is going to be key for every business moving forward. But from an outbound approach, is there any? I mean, that's kind of inbound, or I guess almost more passive. From an outbound approach, is there anything on that side of the fence that's worked for almost every one of your clients?
Well, email is still a very important part of the equation. I think people are misusing email, whether they have, they're not thinking about, the customer target enough, or they're thinking where they are in the funnel and they're just blasting out emails and those types of things. And, the email blast routine is convenient and it'll work a little bit. But once you want to really segment it and put a nice effort into that, we don't have many clients that would not help quite a bit. And not many businesses over the years I've seen where email wouldn't help if done right.
Yeah, we're having a lot of positive success with that at Podcast Chef. The email kind of approach works really well, but you're right. It's not a spray and pray model the way it might have been back in the day. It is very much more a scalpel.
It absolutely is.
So when you're doing your market analysis or your that audit in the beginning, a big part of that is understanding essentially who you're targeting at that level of specificity. You have to get probably 10 times more specific than you think, right? And to your point from the very first, your opening statement here in the podcast, most people don't know their customer very well. So what are the kind of questions that you're going to be using to differentiate the different markets that you're attacking when it comes to those market segments you're talking about? You said they wanted them to be outrageously small or much smaller than you might think. Right. How do you get to that level of granularity?
Well, you have to talk to that many different customers to start. So you need to identify either the customer or the influencer, because there's also, especially, the salespeople run into these folks who could either positively influence a decision or detract from the decision, right? So they have to be part of this map of who are your customers and the triggers and those types of things. And so you need to map those out specifically. So it might be even industry specific, where people in the hospital customer might be very different than a construction customer, that might be very different from a manufacturing customer. And so you do need to, think about, our industries impacting these types of customers, are the different levels they are in the company and who you're talking to impacting those folks, whether they're decision maker, influencer, and the more you can dial that in and get to get the right content to the right person, you're going to have much better success.
So how small of a niche is too small?
I've seen a company literally have a target list of about 30 to 40 customers. And that was their focus. And anyone outside of that group literally was not worth talking to. I would bet it's probably closer to 100 if they really scoured the world, but it's not very big. And for them to do an account-based marketing, approach where you take these called 100 companies and you may have 4 or 5 people within those companies to send different content to or have different conversations with, it could be that small on an outbound side. On an inbound side, if you're out on AdWords and those types of things or social and you're just trying to get to 100 people, that's pretty small. But from an outbound account-based marketing, nurturing type situation, we've seen it that small, and it works.
That's awesome. It's awkward because, a lot of times the business owners that you work with, they're going to be like, well, No, we'll work with anybody. We'll take anybody with a pulse and a check. And the answer is, yeah, but that's not the way marketing really works, is it?
Right. Right. Yeah, it's absolutely right. And, there are also examples of companies. I'm working with a client who's, he's got thousands or tens of thousands of companies in the US that he could work with. And so, those are almost sometimes harder because to do outbound activity to 10,000 is really difficult, or trying to execute, a cost, ROI positive LinkedIn campaign, paid LinkedIn campaign to that size of an audience is very difficult. But because they're really big, and sometimes it's just easier to start small and continue to grow on. But if AdWords and SEO and all these big, massive media channels will work for you to drive traffic to your business, then absolutely do it. But the outbound approach, trying to do it in that broad a range, tends to negatively impact the performance.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, Jay. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. Before we start wrapping up, I have a couple quick questions for you.
Sure.
Easy ones, I hope. Who should be reaching out to yorCMO and you personally, and how can they get a hold of you?
Sure. So my email is jay@yorCMO.com. And, those folks who want to reach out to us, we typically work with companies that are a few $1 million up to $50 or $100 million who don't have marketing leaders on their team and just don't seem to be getting the performance out of their marketing activities or even their sales activities, and just want to have a casual chat. We're always willing to visit with companies and folks on how we can help.
Awesome. And the kind of last question and one of the more fun ones, as far as I'm concerned, is along your travels, starting the practice that you have, you've probably learned a lot. But what are the three biggest kind of takeaways from your journey so far?
One, drink your own Kool-Aid. We follow our process, and we challenge ourselves, and marketing your own as a group of marketers is an interesting challenge. So that's one, is drink your own Kool-Aid, follow your process. Two is always get outside a look into your business. It can't always hurt to have a fresh set of eyes. And then third is stay focused. Don't let a lot of distractions get in the way. Once you have a plan in place, the more you can execute it flawlessly and continue to optimize it, the more likely you are to be successful.
So I want to ask a question here based on that last one, because that stay focused. We're in an age of distraction. And we're also all susceptible to marketing as well, right? So how do you avoid the shiny penny kind of syndrome when it's the latest marketing channel blows up, or the latest this or the latest that? How do you stay core?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing we do is we take new ideas and we put them on a parking lot, because if you keep adding them into the mix, you'll never execute what you're doing well. And then you'll say, oh, that didn't work. Well, was it the tactic or the execution? And so we would, TikTok's new, it's hot, the shorts on YouTube are new and hot. But the reality is, you can put them aside for 30 days and make sure that you're continuing to stay focused and execute flawlessly. And then the other thing is, when you see all these new tactics, absolutely make sure, are they truly, speaking to your target audience, when they want to be talked to? A lot of people are like, oh yeah, I'm doing TikTok videos for B2B sales. And yeah, the B2B customers on TikTok, but did they really come to TikTok to look at your stuff? Maybe, but they're also just there for downtime. And so, timing can affect performance of the tactics also.
That's awesome. Yeah. All right, Jay. Well, I want to thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you, Brian.
Insightful. And definitely want to hear more. Well, maybe we'll circle back with you in a couple months and see if we can't pick up some new lessons from yorCMO.com. Love it.
Sounds great. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Consulting Trap. If you have suggestions for future episodes or would like to be a guest on our show, please send me an email at brian@podcastchef.com. That's BRIAN at podcastchef.com. Before we go, we'd like to thank the sponsor of our show, Podcast Chef. Podcast Chef helps turn ordinary podcasting into a revenue-generating lead magnet for your consulting business. Our Podcasting Done For You service takes away the headache of starting up and running your own podcast. Reach out now to take advantage of our 30-day money-back guarantee. Visit us at podcastchef.com to find out how our team of experts can help you leverage podcasting to take your business to the next level.